There are phrases that aren't just phrases, they're confessions, little windows through which the soul, without realizing it, shows what's really going on inside. And there's a certain kind of man who gives himself away through his mouth. Not because he talks too much, but because he always repeats the same mental shortcuts, the same excuses, the same tricks to avoid facing reality. The curious thing is that stupidity here has nothing to do with IQ, degrees, reading, or how fast someone thinks. It has to do with something else. The inability to learn from life. The habit of turning every pain into someone else's fault, every boundary into an injustice, every correction into an offense. A man can be brilliant with numbers and still be completely blind to himself. And for the Stoics, that's a form of misery, because you might win arguments, but you lose your own direction. There comes a moment when you realize some people don't want to grow, they want to be right, and being right becomes an addiction that costs a lot. It costs relationships, reputation, inner peace, and in the end, it costs lifetime, which is the most expensive currency in the universe. Marcus Aurelius had a quiet discipline, returning inward, going back to his own mind the way someone returns home. And that's the invitation here, without violence or moral superiority, to use 8 phrases as mirrors, not to point fingers, but to recognize symptoms. Because the stupid man isn't only the other guy. He shows up in us too, when we're tired, hurt, scared, too proud to apologize, too rushed to listen. And there's an almost Jungian psychological detail that serves as a warning. The phrase that irritates you the most is often the phrase that describes one of your own shadows. The shadow isn't necessarily the monster hiding away. The shadow is what you haven't yet integrated, what you refuse to feel, what you won't admit, what you sweep under the rug and then pretend doesn't stink. So let's walk slowly, because this isn't an attack against men. It's an invitation for a man to stop betraying his own intelligence with small phrases. Phrases that, on the outside, look like opinions, but on the inside, are pure escape. Picture a common scene. Someone corrects you politely. They don't humiliate you. They just point out a blind spot. And before you can even think, your mouth answers. Not with truth, but with self-protection. And that's when stupidity reveals itself. When the mouth becomes a shield and the mind turns into a courtroom, always acquitting the same defendant. Stoicism doesn't ask you to be perfect. It asks you to be honest. And honesty hurts for a few minutes, but it frees you from years of repetition. The stupid man, on the other hand, buys immediate relief and pays for it with his future. And when I say he always says, I don't mean always, in the literal cartoonish sense. I mean always as in pattern, a pattern that repeats until it becomes destiny. And for the Stoics, destiny is what you accept with courage, not what you manufacture with blindness. Now, no rush, no quick conclusions, no pre-packaged morals. Just observe the human mind at work, because the phrases that follow are like doors. And what's behind those doors isn't ugly. It's just too real for anyone who doesn't want to grow. The first phrase is simple, almost childish. And precisely because of that, it goes unnoticed, like an old habit no one questions anymore. The phrase is, that's just the way I am. Look at what's hidden here. It's not identity. It's surrender. It's an elegant way of saying, I'm not going to take responsibility for my own character. It's as if the man took his own personality, wrapped it in gift paper, and handed it to the world as a permanent excuse. That's just the way I am. As if this way were a final sentence and not a temporary state. Epictetus would say, you're confusing what belongs to you with what doesn't. You think your temperament is fate, but temperament is raw material, not the finished work. That's just the way I am usually shows up when someone asks for the bare minimum, respect, consistency, presence, and the person responds as if they were being attacked. It's the ego defending itself against the need to evolve. Jung would notice something even deeper. Sometimes, that's just the way I am, is the fear of discovering who you could become if you took off the armor. Because change is scary. Change means losing a familiar character, and the stupid man prefers the character, even if it destroys everything around him because at least it's familiar. The second phrase comes right after, like a twin sister. It appears when life demands consequences. The phrase is, "It's not my fault." This is a dangerous phrase because sometimes, genuinely, it really isn't your fault. But the stupid man doesn't use it to be fair. He uses it to avoid responsibility. He turns life into a police station. There's always a guilty party outside. The system, the woman, the kids, the boss, the government, his childhood, anxiety, luck. Everything. Except him. Seneca had a horror of this kind of escape because it keeps you in the weakest position in the world, the permanent victim. The permanent victim doesn't learn. She accuses. She collects stories. She proves in detail why she couldn't have done anything different. And while she proves it, life passes by. And while life passes by, character hardens. Deep down, this phrase has a clear psychological function, to protect self-esteem from an old wound. Because taking responsibility means tolerating an uncomfortable truth. I was wrong. And for some people, saying I was wrong feels like the floor disappearing beneath them. They prefer to keep their pride rather than regain clarity. The third phrase usually comes with a smile, sometimes with sarcasm, sometimes with aggression disguised as honesty. It's, "I'm just being honest." This phrase is a very common mask, because there are men who confuse honesty with brutality. They confuse frankness with lack of self-control. And the big irony is that what they call honesty is often just impulsiveness. It's emotion behind the wheel, no brakes, no elegance, no consideration. The Stoics weren't fake, they were precise. And precision includes the questions the stupid man never asks. Is what I'm about to say necessary? Is it true? Is it helpful? Is this the right moment? Honesty without wisdom is just venting. It's anger trying to justify itself with a pretty word. And here Jung would come in like a scalpel. Why does someone need to be honest in a way that hurts so much? Often because there's a shadow of resentment looking for an exit. The person feels small somewhere inside and tries to regain power by hurting someone else, and then calls it honesty, so they don't have to face their own cruelty. Notice how these three phrases have something in common. They all protect the image of the self. That's just the way I am. It's not my fault, I'm just being honest. All of them say, don't touch me. But living means being touched. Life, with or without your permission, will press on your weak spots. The difference is, will you turn that into a school or into a war? And while the stupid man turns it into a war, he becomes more and more predictable. He repeats the same conflicts with different people, in different places with different scripts, but always with the same phrase underneath. And that's when the mind starts to harden, because it stops being a tool for learning and becomes a tool for defense. There's a scene that keeps repeating. Someone tries to talk, and he feels like it's a trial. He doesn't listen to understand. He listens to reply. And in the rush to reply, he doesn't realize he's losing the rarest opportunity that exists, the chance to truly know himself. And it's exactly at that moment that the fourth phrase usually appears, like a wall thrown up in a hurry, to block any entry of reality. The fourth phrase has a tone of contempt. Sometimes it comes as a short laugh, sometimes as a superior look, sometimes as a final sentence. It is, "That's nonsense." That can be anything. Therapy, feelings, boundaries, spirituality, humility, silence, self-criticism, apologizing, talking without fighting, admitting fear. "That's nonsense" is the fastest way to kill a conversation without having to argue. It's intellectual murder. You don't debate, you diminish. The stupid man loves to diminish whatever he can't sustain. And that isn't strength, it's fragility. Because a strong mind examines, a weak mind mocks. Marcus Aurelius, in his Discipline, reminded himself that many things seem big or small depending on the angle. The stupid man chooses the angle that protects his pride. And what's psychologically behind this phrase is usually fear of vulnerability. Because if he says this matters, he might have to feel something. He might have to change. He might have to apologize. He might have to admit he's lost. And losing the tough guy character feels to him like death. The fifth phrase is sister to the fourth, but more aggressive and more seductive, because it gives the ego a feeling of control. It's, "I know what I'm doing." Notice how this phrase sounds like maturity, but in the wrong mouth, it's just stubbornness. It's a spell of self-conviction. The stupid man says, "I know," so he doesn't have to look. He says, "I know," when, in truth, he doesn't want to know, because truly knowing would require humility and course correction. Seneca warned, "The greatest danger isn't ignorance. It's being ignorant that you're ignorant. It's thinking you already know and therefore not learning." The stupid man doesn't say, "I know," the way someone who is oriented does. He says, "I know," the way someone slams a door shut. And when the door closes, reality doesn't stay outside. It comes in through the window, usually as a crisis. The sixth phrase is more subtle. It comes disguised as pragmatism, as real life, as dry maturity. And it is. That's just how the world is. This phrase seems like a simple comment about reality, but very often it's a surrender. It's the man using the world as an excuse for his own lack of virtue. That's just how the world is becomes permission to be disloyal, cold, negligent, dishonest, cowardly. He turns the evil he sees outside into authorization to practice it inside. Epictetus made a distinction the stupid man hates. There are things that depend on you and things that don't. The world doesn't depend on you. Your character does. When you say that's just how the world is to justify what you do, you're handing over what is yours, your choice, to what isn't yours. And there's a Jungian nuance here. That's just how the world is can be projection. The man sees in the world what's inside him. If he's bitter, he believes everything is bitter. If he's suspicious, he believes everything is a lie. And then he calls it realism, when very often it's just an unrecognized inner state. Notice the sequence. First, he defines himself as unchangeable. Then he escapes responsibility. Next, he calls aggression honesty. Then he ridicules whatever destabilizes him. Then he asserts control as though he needs to convince himself. And now he turns the world into an alibi for his own moral decline. These phrases have a common smell. They avoid the inner work. They avoid the discipline the Stoics called examination. A man can avoid this examination for years and even seem strong. But life has a cruel way of charging what was postponed. And when it charges, it doesn't charge with words. It charges with losses. And it's exactly at this point that the last two phrases come in, the most dangerous ones, because they don't just avoid growth. They sabotage the possibility of intimacy, friendship, peace. They're phrases that look like self-affirmation, but work like slow poison, both for the one who hears them and for the one who repeats them. And the first of these two usually appears when someone tries to offer help, or when life asks for a minimum of openness. The seventh phrase is short, hard, and is often applauded by those who confuse rigidity with strength. It is, "I don't need anybody." At first glance, this can sound like independence, but in repetition, it's almost always fear. Fear of depending, fear of trusting, fear of being seen. The stupid man confuses autonomy with isolation. He builds a wall and calls it freedom, except the wall doesn't just protect him from suffering, it also protects him from love. And without realizing it, he becomes safe and alone. The Stoics spoke of inner self-sufficiency, not contempt for community. Marcus Aurelius kept repeating the image of the body. Every part exists for the whole. A man wasn't made to deny connections, but to choose them with dignity. The problem is that connections require humility. Connections require listening. Connections require acknowledging need. And the stupid man considers need a humiliation. Jung would say, when you say, "I don't need anybody," very often you're trying to close an old wound with a steel phrase. Maybe you needed someone and no one came. Maybe you trusted and were betrayed. Maybe you asked and were mocked. And so the psyche makes an oath. Never again. Except that oath over time becomes a prison. The wound isn't healed, it's frozen. And freezing isn't peace, it's anesthesia. The eighth phrase is the most subtle and the most destructive because it sounds mature. It sounds like self-control. It sounds like, "I'm not going to waste my time." But it's usually used to run away from any serious conversation, any honest confrontation, any emotional responsibility. The phrase is, "I don't have time for this." Notice, sometimes you really don't have time. But the stupid man says this when in reality, he doesn't have the courage. "I don't have time" becomes synonymous with, "I don't want to feel. I don't want to face it. I don't want to talk. I don't want to take responsibility. I don't want to apologize. I don't want to grow up." And life is merciless with this phrase, because time is exactly the substance of existence. You can hide your heart behind your schedule, but you can't hide your soul from the clock. One day the bill arrives. The kid grows up distant. The marriage becomes a formality. The friends disappear. Health demands payment. And then, curiously, time suddenly appears. Except it appears too late. It appears when life is no longer offering chances with the same generosity. The Stoics had a healthy obsession with time, but for the opposite reason, not to escape from themselves, but to return to themselves. You will die, the philosophy said, not as a threat, but as clarity. And that clarity was supposed to make you more human, not harder, more present, not more rushed, more responsible, not more busy. Now look at the whole set of these 8 phrases as if they were steps on a downward staircase. That's just the way I am. It's not my fault. I'm just being honest. That's nonsense. I know what I'm doing. That's just how the world is. I don't need anybody. I don't have time for this. They form a character, and that character has a destiny. He becomes increasingly incapable of learning, incapable of loving, incapable of admitting mistakes, incapable of listening, and without listening, there is no wisdom. Because wisdom isn't having answers, it's having attention. But here comes the most delicate part. Why does a man become this character? Because at some point he believed that feeling was dangerous. He believed that changing meant losing. He believed that humility was weakness. And so life turned into a boxing ring. Except no one really wins in a ring where the opponent is your own conscience. And that's exactly why, before any lesson, we need to do an integration. Not the moralistic kind, but the honest kind. As if you took each of these phrases and asked yourself calmly, without drama, what am I trying to avoid when I say this? Because Stoicism doesn't want you to become a saint. It wants you to stop fooling yourself. And Jung doesn't want you to become perfect. He wants you to stop splitting yourself. Stupidity isn't lack of information. It's lack of integration. And now, with these phrases still echoing, without closing them with quick answers, we enter the final part, where we're not going to moralize the stupid man, but to rescue the possible man who exists behind him. If you pay attention, all 8 phrases have one function: to prevent something true from happening inside you, to prevent shame from turning into learning, to prevent guilt from turning into responsibility, to prevent anger from turning into clarity, to prevent pain from turning into maturity. They are locks, and locks for a while feel like protection, but over time they become prison. The stupid man isn't simply a bad man. Very often he's a man who defended himself poorly, a man who, in order not to feel, chose to harden. And hardening gives the illusion of control. You feel less. You get shaken less. You depend less. Except that, along with the pain, you also cut away what gives meaning: connection, tenderness, presence, respect, admiration. The Stoics didn't ask for hardness. They asked for virtue, and virtue, here, means inner mastery. Inner mastery isn't never suffer. It's suffering without becoming small. It's feeling without becoming a hostage. It's being contradicted without becoming cruel. It's being corrected without becoming aggressive. It's noticing that the ego wants to fight and still choosing the better response. Let's integrate phrase by phrase, not to condemn anyone, but to trade each lock for a door. When you say, "That's just the way I am," the Stoic question is, who do I want to be when no one is watching? Because character is exactly that. What you choose to be when there's no audience. Life isn't asking you to change everything at once. It's asking you to stop using identity as an excuse. "That's just the way I am" can become a more honest phrase. I have this impulse and I'm learning to govern it. That is strength. That is mature manhood, because a man isn't someone who never changes. A man is someone who takes the helm. When you say it's not my fault, Epictetus's question is, what depends on me here? Even when you are a victim of something, there's always a part that depends on you. Your response, your boundaries, your choice of what to tolerate, your courage to walk away. The wise man doesn't blame himself for everything, but he also doesn't outsource everything. He chooses responsibility as freedom. When you say, I'm just being honest, the question is, am I being honest or am I being a coward with my own anger? Because some people call cruelty honesty, so they don't have to admit they're resentful. Stoic honesty is clean. It doesn't come to humiliate. It comes to align. It isn't a knife to wound, it's a light to organize. When you say, that's nonsense, the Jungian question is, what part of me feels threatened by this? Mocking is often a confession of fear. The mature man doesn't need to mock. He can say, I don't understand yet. And saying I don't understand is an act of dignity, not weakness. When you say, I know what I'm doing, Seneca's question is, if I really know, why does everything keep repeating? Because repetition is a teacher. If you keep repeating the same conflicts, maybe you don't know as much as you think. Maybe you're just repeating. And the humility to review the path is what separates the man who matures from the man who simply gets older. When you say, that's just how the world is, the question is, and me? Am I going to be the world, or am I going to be my choice? The world will always be mixed. There will always be injustice, lies, superficiality. But your soul doesn't have to become a mirror of the worst. You can be the exception without being naive. You can be firm without being bitter. You can be realistic without being cynical. The cynic is someone who gave up on being good and calls it intelligence. When you say, I don't need anybody, the integration is delicate. Yes, you do need people, not as crutches, as humanity. You need to be seen. You need to be remembered. You need a place where you can rest the character. Stoic self-sufficiency is internal. It's not destroying yourself when you lose. But that doesn't mean living without affection. The man who doesn't need anybody is deep down trying to avoid the chance of being hurt again. Except avoiding the wound isn't healing. Healing is learning to choose better, to set boundaries, to trust with discernment, and still allow closeness. And when you say, I don't have time for this, the final question is, time for what? Because what you call this is often the most important part. A conversation that would save a connection, an apology that would clean the soul, a listening that would create respect, a pause that would bring you back to yourself. You always have time for what you consider priority. And when life is ending, the priorities become painfully clear. In the end, stupidity is a life without examination. And examination isn't neurotic self-demand. It's honest observation. Marcus Aurelius did it the way someone sweeps the house, every day, a little. No drama, no spectacle, just cleaning. So if this video touched you at any point, don't use it to beat yourself up. Use it to guide yourself. And here's a simple, direct exercise to take into your day. Pick one of these 8 phrases and watch your mouth for a week. When the phrase comes, don't fight it. Just pause for 1 second and ask, what am I protecting right now? That 1 second of pause is the beginning of freedom. Because the wise man isn't the one who never falls into these phrases. He's the one who notices quickly and returns to center. Returns to what depends on him. Returns to the courage to mature. If you want, write in the comments which of these phrases you've caught yourself saying, or which one you hear the most out there, and what you think it's hiding behind it. And if this kind of reflection does you good, like the video, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs a mirror without humiliation. Sometimes a phrase heard at the right moment saves years of repetition. And when you turn this video off, do one quiet thing for yourself. Choose a better response than the impulse. Just one. Today. Because that's how a man stops being a hostage to his own ego and starts becoming the author of his own destiny.